Gray's Island Cemetery. It all began on a chilly evening in October 2019. My friend Alex and I, feeling restless due to the onset of COVID-19 lockdowns and the resulting boredom, decided to embark on an exploration of Gray's Island Cemetery. Alex had never visited this place before, so he was unsure of what to expect. We set out on our adventure, navigating through the cold, misty night. The fog was thick, cloaking our surroundings in a ghostly veil, making it difficult to see our path clearly. We moved cautiously, aware of the eerie atmosphere but driven by our curiosity and the thrill of the unknown. Upon our arrival at the cemetery, both Alex and I were struck by an unsettling sensation, as if unseen eyes were watching us. Alex, usually a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural, felt it too. He questioned whether this place was a common spot for visitors, and I told him it wasn't. We stepped out of the car, grabbed our equipment, and approached the cemetery gate. That's when we were hit by an awful stench. It was somewhat like sulfur, but not quite the same. Despite the unpleasant odor, we decided to press on. As we ventured further, the fog seemed to grow thicker, more impenetrable than before. It was as if the mist itself was a living entity, enveloping us in a dense, sight-stealing blanket. The atmosphere felt heavier with each step we took, adding an eerie quality to our exploration. I cautioned Alex to stay close, feeling like we had stepped into a scene from a scary movie. The fog was so thick that we couldn't see anything in front of us. The silence in the cemetery was unnerving. Usually you'd hear the distant croak of frogs or some rustling, but that night, there was nothing. It was an eerie, unsettling quiet, even for someone like me who's used to cemeteries. We were about halfway through the cemetery when I suddenly realized Alex wasn't next to me anymore. I started calling out his name, but there was no response, just silence. A sense of isolation washed over me as I wandered through the fog trying to find him. I had been exploring for about an hour, and there was still no sign of him. My voice grew hoarse from shouting, and I paused to catch my breath. That's when I heard a crunching sound behind me. Turning around swiftly, I half expected to see Alex pulling a prank, but to my dismay, there was nobody there. Time was ticking. We were now into our second hour in the cemetery, and my camera's battery was down to half. Deciding to change my focus, I headed towards a well-known spot in the cemetery, a statue famously missing its head. Reaching the statue, an unexpected and startling event occurred. A small piece of marble was tossed in my direction. It wasn't thrown with force, but it was enough to startle me. I called out to Alex again, this time with a mix of fear and frustration, urging him to stop messing around if he was the one behind it. The atmosphere was growing more tense, and the combination of the fog, silence, and these strange occurrences was beginning to unnerve me. The sound of leaves shuffling behind me caught my attention, and I quickly turned around. To my relief, it was Alex, but he was approaching from a completely different direction than where the marble had come from. I immediately questioned him, asking if he had heard me calling out for him. His response was a simple no. I explained with a mix of confusion and concern that I had been shouting his name for nearly 2 hours. How could he not have heard me? But he insisted that he hadn't heard anything. He explained that he had been at the front part of the cemetery exploring the area with the older graves. I looked at Alex, puzzled, and said, "But I was shouting for you the whole time." He just shook his head and replied, "I didn't hear anything." His response left me baffled, but I suggested we keep going with our exploration. It was now 3 a.m., often referred to as the witching hour, and the atmosphere felt even more charged. We decided to use our Flux 2 response device, hoping to communicate with any spirits that might be present. We asked simple questions like, "Are you friendly and do you mean us any harm?" To our amazement, we received some responses that seemed quite intelligent. Feeling adventurous, we decided to use a trigger object, a planchette typically used with Ouija boards. We carefully placed it on the statue. However, I must emphasize that I generally advise against using Ouija boards. They can be unpredictable, and you never really know what kind of energies or entities you might be inviting in. After a while, we suddenly realized that we had forgotten about the planchette. When we looked for it, it was nowhere to be found. We searched around, but it had seemingly vanished. To our further surprise, the board we had brought along was also missing. Just then, the sound of a baby crying in the distance reached our ears. We exchanged glances, our faces pale with shock. I muttered, "I think we should leave now." Without hesitation, we agreed to pack up our remaining equipment and get out of there, leaving the board and planchette behind. As we hurried back, our eyes caught sight of two tall, shadowy figures standing in the distance. They were about 6 feet tall, just dark silhouettes without any discernible features. We stopped dead in our tracks, a strange, uneasy feeling twisting in our stomachs. The figures were roughly 100 feet away, but despite the distance and the fog, their outlines were eerily clear against the night. They had no faces, no details, just two imposing, shadowy forms. Feeling a surge of fear, we didn't stay to investigate. We turned and ran as fast as we could. The sight of those mysterious figures etched into our memories. We hurried back to our car, hearts pounding, and immediately decided to review our recorded footage before leaving. Unfortunately, one of our cameras had been damaged and was unusable at the moment. We had to wait until we could safely extract and dry the memory card to see if any footage was salvageable. However, we were able to review the footage from our other camera, Camera 1. While watching the footage, we came across the part where I was calling out for Alex. To our surprise, we could faintly hear a voice responding in the background. It was soft, but definitely there, mimicking my calls in a similar tone. After reviewing what footage we could, we realized we had enough material to put together a video, even though we didn't capture as much as we had hoped. The next step was to leave this eerie place, but when we tried to start the car, it just wouldn't budge. I pulled out my booster pack to jumpstart the car, but it was no use at first. After waiting anxiously for a few minutes, we tried again, and thankfully the car finally started. This wasn't an uncommon occurrence at this location. Gray's Island Cemetery is notorious for causing vehicle troubles. I had heard stories of people often needing tows to get out of there. And even more intriguing, many tow companies are hesitant or outright refuse to service that area, especially at night. Finally back home, we began uploading the footage, momentarily forgetting about the lost Ouija board and planchette. After a while, Alex went to the kitchen to grab a drink. Suddenly, I heard him exclaim in shock. Curious, I asked him what was wrong. His response sent chills down my spine. "They're here." Confused, I asked what he meant. "The board and the planchette," he replied, skeptical yet intrigued. I went to see for myself. To my disbelief, there they were, just sitting in our kitchen. The situation was too bizarre and unsettling. We decided the best course of action was to destroy these items. We took them to the fire pit in my front yard and started a fire, hoping to burn them. However, burning the board proved to be a challenge. It took an entire hour for the board to even begin to burn, and even then it wasn't completely destroyed. I couldn't understand it. Why wouldn't the board burn completely? After some time, we gave up, extinguished the fire, and went back inside to continue our editing work. I connected the rechargeable batteries of my camera to the wall outlet for charging. Barely 5 minutes had passed when suddenly sparks erupted from the plug, and to our horror, a fire started on the wall. We immediately called emergency services, and thankfully the fire department arrived swiftly. In the midst of the chaos, we were able to get my dog out safely, preventing a worse disaster. Once the firefighters had finished their work and declared the area safe, they informed me that I would need to relocate to a different room due to the damage. Following this unsettling incident, I made the decision to move out entirely. The memories associated with that place, especially after the fire, were too unnerving. I vowed never to return to Gray's Island Cemetery. The whole series of events, starting from our eerie visit to the cemetery to the inexplicable fire back home, left us deeply shaken. As for the footage we had captured that night, my friend and I decided it was best left unwatched. This is the first time I'm sharing this real-life ghost story with the public. Based on my experiences, I strongly advise anyone interested in the paranormal to steer clear of using Ouija boards or attempting to burn them. Such actions can open doors to negative energies and experiences that are best avoided. If you do find yourself exploring places known for paranormal activity, especially those with a history of negative energy, it's crucial to take protective measures. I suggest using sage to cleanse yourself and making it clear to any spirits that they are not to follow you. These are lessons I've learned through difficult experiences, and I share them in the hope of helping others stay safe while exploring the unknown. Remember, your safety and well-being should always come first in these situations.